Starting with Genesis chapter 16, verse 1, I want you to focus on this woman named Hagar. Now, the way that this worked out in Genesis chapter 12, Abraham is called from Ur of the Chaldees to go to a land that God would show him. So God takes him down to this place, and when he gets there, there's a famine. Now, I don't know about you, but I would really be concerned if God called me somewhere and said, I'm going to take you to a place and it's going to be yours, and you get there and there's no food. So Abram has to go to Egypt, and he gets to Egypt. And remember, you know the story. His wife is older than old, but she's still beautiful. And Abram says, listen, when we get there, tell everybody that you're my sister so they don't kill me so they can take you. So they get there to Egypt, you know the story. So she tells, yes, I'm his sister. Now think about this for a moment. We read through that and we miss it. Where has Sarah been? She's been traveling in the desert. She's been living in tents. She now goes into a town. The king or the Pharaoh says, I want you to come and be a part of my harem, which means she gets to go into this lavish living setting. The best of the best. She gets to take a bath. She gets to soak in all of the different rose petals and different things. And then suddenly God reveals to the king what is going on, and that he's in trouble if he doesn't give Sarah back to Abram. Can you imagine being Sarah, sitting in your rose-petaled bathtub after traveling in the desert, living in tents? They come in and say, you have to leave. What? I don't think she was really excited that she was going to have to leave this. But the king comes, takes her, gives slaves to Abram and Sarah that would serve them as they leave, gives them money, gives them all this stuff. And so now Sarah's leaving, and she does have some plunder that they took from the Egyptians. But back out into the desert and into a tent again. In chapter 13, Abraham and Lot have an issue. Lot was his nephew, and so they split. They part company. In chapter 14, there's a war. 4 kings against 5 kings. Lot gets taken. Abram comes in, saves Lot. Chapter 15, Abraham is spoken to by God, and we call it the Abrahamic covenant. Chapter 16, because in 15, God tells Abram, you're going to have a child. Well, Abram, Sarai were both older than old. So they decide they're going to help God. God says you're going to have a child. So Sarah says, I'm too old to have a child. You know, I got this Egyptian slave from Egypt. Why don't you make her one of your wives or concubines? Why don't you raise up a child through her? Everyone goes, okay. After much prayer and fasting, okay. It probably wasn't a good thing for this Egyptian slave. She was now going to be connected with an old man about my age. And the story begins for our message today. So keeping that in mind, verse 16, or chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. See, I didn't lie to you. So she said to Abraham, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar, gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong that I'm suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now that she knows that she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your servant is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." And Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" And that's a question God's asking us today. Where have you come from and where are you going? She says, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. And the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will also increase your descendants, that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man." You interpret that. "His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in hostility towards all of his brothers." And that's why we have the conflict today with anti-Semitism. We could go into the history, but it's Mother's Day. We don't want to go into that. Verse 13. So Hagar, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Beer-lahai-roi, which is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Now, underline this, verse 16. This is really important for the rest of the message. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. How old was Abram? 86 years old. Don't forget that. Now we jump ahead. There are other things that happen between this chapter and what happens in chapter 21. Chapter 21, Sarah has a son. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abram in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abram gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore. When the son Isaac was 8 days old, Abram circumcised him, and God commanded him, as God commanded him. Underline verse 5. Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. How old was he when Ishmael was born? 86. How old was he when Isaac was born? 100. So how old was Ishmael at this point? Good. You guys are geniuses. Verse 6. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in my old age." She was 90 years old. Verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, need to underline that, on the day that Isaac was weaned, Abram held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abram was mocking. In other words, he was teasing the little baby. Depending on how old the little baby is at this point. Because when a child in the Old Testament, when they were weaned, they was between 2 to 4 years old. So let's say it was 2 years old. How old would Ishmael be? 16. If it was 4 years, he would have been 18. This is really important. Really important. So this older son who thought he was going to be the heir now realized he's no longer in line to be the heir. Verse 11. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, because in verse 10, let me read verse 10. Sarah said to Abraham, "Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Who's running the family? Just like normal, right? I run my household as long as Carrie tells me I can. So Abram has had Ishmael as a son in his household anywhere from 16 to 18 years. And she says, get rid of him. He's no longer part of this. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abram greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation too, because he is your offspring. So early the next morning, Abram took some of the food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Now she's wandering in the desert with a boy, how old? 16 to 18 years old. He's not a baby. We always get this picture. He was this little baby by the way that he acts, the way that Hagar deals with him. Watch this. Verse 15. When the water of skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Now, you read the rest of the story about Ishmael throughout the Old Testament and the history of it today. But I want to ask you, what in the world was wrong with Ishmael? 16 to 18 years old, acting like a little baby. Now, he may have been horribly depressed. He might have been absolutely broken. He may have had a complete breakdown. What did he just lose? Everything. In one fell swoop, he lost everything. All hope was gone. All desire to live was gone. Now he's wandering in the desert with his mom alone when he would have had basically what would have equated to a kingdom. And overnight, he's nothing. We've experienced times like that, haven't we? Where everything was going good, then something fell apart. And suddenly we didn't want to take another step. We didn't want to go on. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe he was so broken. Or maybe the child had some kind of an emotional disability. She was treating him like a little boy. We don't know, but see, we read this and we miss it. What in the world was wrong with this picture for a 16 to an 18-year-old in the eyes of the people at that time? Man, not a child, but being treated like a little child. You see, what you see in this, you could go into this whole study about Ishmael, but how Hagar deals with him. If he's emotionally broken, she's emotionally broken with him, and she's helping him. She's walking with him through his problem, through his issue. If he's got a disability, she's loving him through the issue and walking with him. Mothers do that. They're supposed to do that. To be there for her son. And notice, God took notice of it. She says, I can't bear to see him die. You know, I know some moms who are so broken because one of their children have wandered away. And their child is in a horribly distressed mess where they can't even take another step. It seems like their whole life has fallen apart, and the mother is weeping over that child, broken over that child, hurting over that child, walking through the mess with their child, but their child won't listen. The child won't get up. The child just wants to lay down and die, and the mother is still there weeping, broken over her child. Hagar was like that. Hagar was there with her boy. Men don't generally have that kind of love. Not that type of response. You know, get up, rub some mud on it, take another step, get out of here. You know, all these years I've been waiting for an empty nest. Now I got you still stuck with me wandering around in a desert behind a bush. Why don't you get up and go do something? Stop crying. But she's broken because she's lost everything as well. Maybe being broken and rejected has a purpose. Maybe every one of us have experienced those times for a reason. Maybe it's so that we know how to walk through those times with other people who are broken and rejected. They were in a hopeless mess. Ishmael was broken. Hagar couldn't help him. Moms, have you ever felt that? She couldn't help him until God showed up. How many times my life was spared? How many times my struggles were eased? And how many messes I was able to walk through because I had a mom who constantly prayed for me? There's nothing more powerful than the prayers of a mom for children. Verse 19 says, then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. Now that could have been that God just immediately made it appear, or it could be that she was so broken and she was crying. Just like Ishmael, not able to get up and move, maybe she was just so broken, she filled with tears, she just couldn't see, and God wiped the tears and said, hey, look, you're right in front of some water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave that to the boy, gave him a drink. Verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up, and he lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt, and now a new set of problems began. Sorry. You're right back into another mess. You know, I want to look at that woman, Hagar, for a moment. She was an Egyptian. She was taken from her home. She was taken from her religion. She was taken from everything she knew, everything that she had seen as comforting in Egypt, a beautiful place, given to a man who drew her out into the desert to wander around and to live in tents. Not because she chose that. It was forced upon her. Very probably the maidservant was one that was given to Abraham in chapter 12. What would have happened if Abraham and Sarai hadn't decided they were going to try to help God out? If they would have just waited for him? Well, the Israeli-Arabic conflicts we see today would not be. Sometimes we get really tired because God doesn't answer the way we think, so we think we have to go out and do something to help him out. And how many messes that created in my life. But God calls her by name when she's in the desert. Hagar. Now you say, well, it was an angel of the Lord. Well, the angel of the Lord was a generally a showing up of Jesus in the Old Testament, embodiment of Christ. But God calls her name Hagar. He knew everything about her. He knew everything that she'd ever done, everything she was running away from, much like the woman at the well. And he had compassion for her. She had a dilemma. Do you know what a dilemma is? Have you ever defined a dilemma? It means a situation that has no good outcome. Whatever choice you make, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. It's a tough situation. You see no favorable outcome. That's a dilemma. What do I do? Every one of us at some point in our life, we've faced that. We've had a dilemma. Hagar had no place to turn. She was in the desert. She was alone. And suddenly her Egyptian religious upbringing was about to be shattered, because her concept of gods was entirely different than how her relationship just switched with Yahweh. And then she says, "You're the God who sees me. You're the God who hears me." Let's put that in Avatar terminology. I see you. It means I'm looking at you and I see more than just you. I see who you are. I see your heart. I see everything about you. I know you intimately. And God says this to Hagar. I see you. I hear you. I love you. You're not alone. How many times, like Hagar, have we wanted to run away from things? Quit our job, end a relationship, give up on something that we had invested in, and just want to just quit. And we think God doesn't care, God doesn't pay attention, God doesn't even know who we are. And we feel like we're all alone, and that's usually when we make our mess worse and we start making decisions that we should never have made. I've told some of you this before. The amount of times as a pastor, especially working with college age and younger, when people were saying, "I'm so afraid that Jesus is going to come back and I won't have experienced what it's like to be married." And I went, "Oh God, what a thing to be worried about. I want to be married. I want to be married. I want to be married. I want to know what it's about." 3 years later, they come to me and said, "Okay, I got married. How soon will Jesus come back? When can I be delivered?" Now, I'm not saying marriage is a horrible thing, but it can be at times. And sometimes some of your greatest struggles happen in marriage. In other words, marriage doesn't fix all your problems. It just kind of adds pressure to it and makes you have to work together on your problems together rather than alone. But you know, Satan comes along. He says, "Why don't you just give up? Why don't you quit? You deserve better. Why don't you just stop what you're doing?" But no matter how ugly, complicated, or hopeless your situation seems to be, remember, God sees you in the midst of your mess, and He knows who you are. He will always show you the way out if you wait on Him. See, the problem Abram and Sarah had was they didn't want to wait. They had waited long enough. It was over with. Let's help God out. And then they created this big mess. You know, if you just wait on the Lord, He will help you to mount up with wings as eagles. You'll run and not be weary. You'll walk, you'll not faint, according to the Scripture. Just wait on the Lord. Waiting is hard, especially in our culture. We don't like to wait. That's why we call it fast food, fast pain relief. You watch, how many of you, if you're watching a commercial and it says, listen, right now you're in the middle of a really bad headache, take this. In time, it'll go away. And then you see a commercial, take this. It's fast pain relief. Your headache will be gone. You go, yes. Kind of reminds me of the spirituality in the 70s. You listen to the radio stations. I had just become a Christian. I was flipping through the channels and listening to, we had KISS FM in Los Angeles. We had all these other things, and it's going, hey, this Sunday out at the drag strip, we're having 26 ground-pounding funny cars, and you're going to just love everything that's happening here, and it's going to be great, and we've got all these things happening. You flip the channel. Friends, do you really want to know what joy's like? You need to give your life to Jesus. You go, no way, flip back. And that's 26 ground-pounding funny cars. And so, it just, obviously, we realize that joy and everything is something far deeper than this ground-pounding funny cars. But that's how people look at us. They're in the midst of their problems. They look at us and we walk around like we've been sucking on green persimmons for 3 years. Our darn country, what are the kids doing today? What in the world's going on? And they know everything that we stand against. They don't know anything about what we stand for. And we get tired of waiting. So we find ourselves fighting battles we should never have gotten involved in. We do, don't we? Abram, it was accredited to him as faith, and yet he and Sarah didn't have the faith to wait. So even in that, we see there's this human element, isn't there? There's a human element that always creates our messes. You'll hear me say this more and more. You've heard me say it before. God did not create my mess. But He is the one that will help me get through my mess. Never once will God say, you're too lost and I can't help you. Never will God say, I don't love you. Never will God say to you, never. Nope, you've messed up too much. There's no hope for you. There's only one guy that's telling you that, and that's Satan. And he's trying to get you to get out from under God's care in the midst of your mess and turn it into a dilemma. There are a few things I want to give to you. First, you're not lost. God knows right where you are. You need to embrace that. God knows right where you are. Maybe you're under a bush, or maybe you're sitting right next to the answer, but you don't see it. Or maybe you're just in a place God says, if you'll just wait a little bit longer. Second, God fully understands the mess that you're in. And He understands that most of the time it's a mess you created. Third, God is going to provide what you need to get you through your mess. Fourth, there is always hope when God is involved. Embrace that. There is always hope when God is involved. It's when you take Christ out of your crisis that you really are without hope. And fifth, God is always with you, even in the midst of your mess. See, one of the ways God always helped me through my messes, I talked about it earlier, has a name. It's called my mother. My mom. Just as Hagar was with her son through every bit of it, she probably in the desert had already given him the last of the water. She probably sacrificed everything for him so he could survive, and he was just laying under a bush crying. She would have died for him. And she was ready to, but God showed up. Things change when God shows up. This is my second Mother's Day without my mom. She died last April, a year ago April. She walked through more of my messes with me than I can count. Praying all the way. Because when my mom came in, even before I committed my life to Christ, she brought Christ into the mess with me. She always prayed for me during those times, and God always showed up. So you can be a loving mom, a caring mom, a protective mom, a sacrificing mom, but nothing will ever match the power of a praying mom. So moms, I'm going to tell you, the greatest one thing you can do is to pray.